Hi, I'm Lisa Maureen Miller, your host for the Intentional Creator Summit, where we explore what it takes to truly thrive as a creator making a positive impact in the world. Today, I am having a conversation with David A. Robertson. David is a decorated Canadian writer and freelance journalist. He has been the recipient of many awards, including 2 Governor General Awards, and is the recipient of the Writers' Union of Canada Freedom to Read Award. His memoir, Blackwater, won the Carol Shields Winnipeg Book Award and the Alexander Kennedy Isbister Award for Nonfiction. David's middle grade fantasy series, The Missawa Saga, includes the #1 national bestseller, The Barren Grounds, which was acquired by ABC Signature, a subsidiary of Disney Television Studios. David is also the writer and host of the award-winning podcast, Kiweo. He is a member of Norway House Cree Nation and lives in Winnipeg. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, David. Welcome to the Intentional Creators Summit. I'm so happy to have you here and to get the chance to speak with you today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I've been really looking forward to our conversation, and I've been so enjoying listening to your podcast. And I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about your journey. You've done a lot of things. You've written many books, articles, kids' books, novels. You've done a podcast. How did all of this sort of start for you as a career? How did you land here where you are today?
Wow. I think that really looking back, I wouldn't be here today if I didn't think about doing this when I was a kid. I was 8 years old and writing poetry in my grade 3 classroom. And writing actually is very similar to how I write now. I was in the back of the class on my own, writing in the dark, still write in the dark. And I just fell in love with it. I gave my teacher all my poems and told her that I wanted to be a writer. I told my mom I wanted to be a writer that day. My teacher made it into a booklet for me. And I just felt so proud. I had made a book. So I went home to my mom. I told her I wanted to be a writer. And that was when I was 8. I think that the seeds of it were there when I was very young. I can honestly say, I don't think I ever wanted to be anything other than a writer for my whole life. And then it was just development. I was just trying to get better at it. Yeah, I think that I always had a bit of skill at writing, but I wasn't a really good storyteller at first. I don't think the two are hand in hand all the time. You have to really work at it. And yeah, and then I think for me, it was developing skill, trying to hone my craft. That sounds cheesy, but trying to find my voice and trying to develop my craft. And then for me, I think it's just finding the right focus was a big thing for me. So it wasn't just working to be a writer. It was also thinking about what I wanted to say with my work. And that was a big turning point for me. And that focus really came from looking back at my own childhood and thinking about the stuff that I was reading and what was absent in what I was reading or what was misrepresented. So Indigenous people in the books that I was reading as a kid weren't anywhere there accurately. So they were either ignored or stereotypically or something. And I didn't want kids to have books like that. So I decided I wanted to write books that were going to educate, that were going to expose kids to truth, that were going to offer accurate representations of Indigenous people, hopefully empower children. And that was the big turning point for me. And so my first book was published in 2009 with Highwater Press here in Winnipeg. And there's just been a progression. Part of the reason why I've tried so many different forms of literature, I guess, is twofold. One of them is I want to work hard to develop my skills so I can get better. And another is just wanting to find a broad audience for what I want to say. So I just don't want books only for grade 4 to 6. I want books from kindergarten all the way to grade 12 and beyond. So I'm trying to reach everybody. And so that's why comics and picture books and middle grade and young adults and memoir and podcasts and all those different things For me, it's the fun part is like learning how to write in all these different forms and try to do it well. And a big part of what I do now has been advocacy and public presentations and things like that, classroom visits. And um, so that's how that progression has looked for me. And it's really, it's a continued focus. It's what needs to be written about, what hasn't been written about, what do people need to know, how can we better prepare kids, and then try to fill those gaps with stories that are meaningful.
I think it's interesting how your starting place, it sounds, was looking back at your own childhood and looking for what you described as the things that were missing and how can you fill those gaps. So as a writer, when you started and maybe you didn't have an audience yet, how did that look in terms of you were driven to create sort of these books and this change? Did you trust that when you write, the audience will come? Or what was it like in those early years of trying to find a place for these stories and getting them into schools and that sort of journey?
For me, what I've told kids when I do writing workshops with them is one of the things we often say or hear is that you write what I don't really think that's what you should be doing though. I think that when you write, you definitely incorporate things that you know in your work because it's just easier at times. I set a lot of my books in Winnipeg because I really know Winnipeg very well. I've lived here most of my life, but that's not writing the story that I know. It's just writing what a place I know. Writing is like an act of exploration and of a pursuit of connections. That's what I feel. And so if you're writing from that comfort zone, only how are you growing? How are you learning? How is that meaningful for you? And so I feel like for me, it started out at first just writing what I was interested in, writing what I wanted to learn about, what I wanted to know. And what I felt would happen was that I would connect with people who had similar interests, who had similar passions, who had a similar need to explore and learn, to connect. And so I feel like that's was a big driving force early on in my writing career. And now I feel like I'm probably a little more deliberate, even though I still write. I wouldn't write about something I'm not interested in knowing, but I feel like now it's more like When We Were Alone, for example, it came about when I was looking at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action. And it was saying we wanted to teach residential school history to kindergartners. And I thought, what's out there for kindergartners? How are we going to help teachers teach residential school history to kindergartners? It's a tough job. And so I was like, how can I help make that easier for teachers? I'm going to write a book because that's what I could do. So I wrote When We Were Alone. So it's a little bit more deliberate in that way. But initially it was just what I wanted to know and learn and what I felt was important and meaningful from my perspective at the time when I was writing it. And then it's worked out well, especially because I did have education in mind. And so my books have gone into a lot of schools and libraries, and which has been really nice to see. But that's how it worked for me.
Yeah, the way that I found you was through When We Were Alone,
Mm.
and my daughter's in kindergarten. So it's interesting to hear you say that was for specifically her age because we found it right around the time that she was entering into kindergarten. And I can honestly say, one of her very favorite. Yeah.
You can tell her I wrote it for her because I did.
Uh,
You know, I get kids often ask me, "What is your biggest inspiration?" And I tell them, "You are. Kids are. That's my biggest inspiration." And I have my own kids, and I want them to grow up in a good, strong community. But more than that, I want them to contribute to making it a good, strong community. And the more, the better you do. So I feel like that's been a big driving force. So definitely your daughter's someone who inspires me. I don't know her, but she she does because kids are the answer.
Mhm.
If we prepare kids, they're going to do really cool things.
What I'm thinking about now is after having listened to Kiweo, your podcast, I was listening again today, and you had talked about some of the things your dad said and also included some of the recordings. And one of the things I'd written down to ask you about was this idea of children as being the hope. I think you talked about that in the podcast. You said, well, there's a couple ideas. You had said, you'd quoted something that I thought was interesting from, I think you said a notebook of his. I am only one, but I am one.
Mm,
I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And what I can do, I ought to do.
mhm,
And I loved, the idea of talking about that a little bit, because I think that there are many creators out there who might feel overwhelmed starting. They maybe want to make a positive difference, but perhaps don't have an audience yet. And just, it can be really easy, I think, in the current climate that we live in to feel discouraged or a bit hopeless about the positive impact that we can make. So I really liked this quote and this idea that we all have the power to do something.
and it's the starfish theory. It really is. It's like, it's making a difference for one person. You never know the resonant impact that can have over time. I used to ask my dad, because my dad did a lot of great things. I used to ask him, did you think you made a difference after you retired? You think you made a difference, Dad? And he used to say, I don't know if I did or not, because if you really do things properly, change doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take a long time. The elders say it takes as much time to heal from the trauma as we were experiencing trauma.
Mhm.
So it can take up to 7 generations, which is around 150 years.
Mhm.
So you have to have that long view of and faith that when you're doing the work, that the work that you do will have a positive impact over time, especially if you do it with a good heart, with good intentions. I think that's so you have to have that kind of faith that even if you impact one person, that you never know what that will do over time. Really important what that one person who's learned from you will do. We are very influential as human beings. It's just if we're going to do good things, what kind of things do we feel like we can do that's in our capacity to do? I often tell kids there's 2 things you need to think about. One of them is, what are you going to do with your life? And whatever you do, something you're passionate about. Life's too short not to do something you're passionate about. If you're afraid of failing, don't let that stop you. Pursue what you're passionate for, because you can fail at anything. So that's not point number one. The second point is no matter what you do, no matter where you find your passion, how can you help people with what you choose to do? My dad used to say that whatever he did it so he could help people. And he used to say to me, I know you write your books and stuff. He was very proud of me for that. But how are you helping? How are you going to help people with the work that you do? And I've really thought about that a lot. I don't know if I've helped people, but I've tried to. And that's all you can really do. And I think that if you do that, it's going to turn out well in the end because you'll reach somebody. And yeah, I think that's really hopeful.
Mhm.
And kids, I have a ton of faith in. Like kids know so much more today than we did when we were growing up. They're starting from this, like this is the way I look at it. I was born and raised in a box. No, not by my parents. My parents raised me really well, but we were all raised in a box, the societally constructed box. And we've had to break down that box and rebuild it. Kids don't have to do that. They don't have that box anymore. They're starting from a foundation of truth because they have story. So they're off to a way better start. And you're going to do really great things. And I've met enough kids to know that they're going to change the world for the better. And I think that's super hopeful. We still are going through some tough times and there's still bad things that happen in the world. But over time, I think that we're going to be I think we're going to be moving in a much more positive direction. Hopefully, I hope we are. I think we will be.
I think we will be too. I hope so. What you talked about there, I thought was interesting because you mentioned the act of writing allows you to share something good. And that your dad said, I love that you're a writer, but are you making a difference? I'm paraphrasing. What I'm thinking of is that the process of connecting with that passion and that integrity allows, I think, creators to share something meaningful. And then the craft takes on a greater meaning because we can create about anything. We can create for the sake of creating, or we could create for the sake of doing something good, creating positive change. So it seems to me that often creators find more power in their work when they touch in on what that difference is that they want to make. And that then the craft takes on a whole new level of significance for them. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to someone who may not yet have found that sense of purpose. Where do you start to look if you're somebody out there who maybe hasn't touched on that sense of passion yet or that sense of possibility?
And that's part of the journey, right? It's part of the journey of, I think in a lot of ways, like I'm still on that journey too. I think it's figuring out what is really important for you. There's so many things that there's so much work that needs to be done.
Mhm.
Not everybody has to write about residential schools. Not everybody has to write about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. There's so many issues that are important to address. And I think it's just looking at what your interests are, what your passions are, what you feel is important to address and to educate people on in your own life. And that's a really personal choice. Part of the work that I've done over the last few years that I never did before was I've been very outward about mental health education. It's something I didn't do at the beginning of my career. But there came a point where I recognized that speaking about it not only helps me, but it helps people, other people. And I think that spark is what is important. I used to suffer pretty badly from mental health struggles, and I did it alone. Like I had my family, but I suffered a lot in isolation because it is an isolating feeling. Let's go through depression and anxiety, and you don't really think that anybody can understand what you're going through. But there's a lot of people going through what you're going through, and that's where writing as connection really comes into it. You know, I began to talk about what I was going through because of what happened in therapy, where I was going to this group therapy anxiety group, and I realized that, well, people are going through what I'm going through,
Mhm.
and it felt a little less. I felt a little less lonely because of that. And so when I started talking about it publicly, I started writing about it with a series like The Reckoner, which is like my young adult series. Almost every time I spoke at a school, a kid came up to me and said, I'm going through what Cole's going through as my character in the book, which is really me as a kid. And that was really empowering for them. And it helped them to speak about their own struggles. So that came about. That's how I think it looks like. That's what the process looks like. It's not, maybe it's not even mental health, but it's like, what's important for you? What do you feel needs to be done? What's not being done right now? Or what you think you can contribute to? And then finding your own way to contribute to it. And again, maybe it's not writing, maybe it's music, maybe it's art, whatever it might be. But that's part of the passion too. I have a big passion for educating on mental health now. And hopefully there's been a couple of people who've, listened to the podcast or read a book of mine and they've felt seen in those words and it's helped them.
Hmm.
That spark is what I think you need to look for. And when you get it, you got to really hold on to it.
And how have your kids impacted your work?
Really in a significant way. I guess what I think about most is, and maybe I alluded to this earlier, but what community they're living in, how safe are they growing up? how strong of a community are they growing up in, especially for my daughters, the Indigenous girls. Like, how safe is their community? And so part of the motivation is trying to make that community a safer place for my kids so that they can walk down the street and not feel like they have to run when there's a car coming up, driving behind them, or any number of things. So they cannot be chased around a store by an employee because they have brown skin, things like. So that's part of it. The other thing is asking them and trying to raise them so that they can also think about ways that they can make their community safer, not just so that they can exist within a strong community, but they can contribute to making that community safer for other people. And so in that way, my children have been a big inspiration for me. And I tell the same thing to any kid I speak to. I'm lucky enough that I've spoken to, I don't know, probably tens of thousands of kids a year. And I always tell them the same things because I feel like they need to hear it. And maybe they hear it from their parents, whatever, but you can never hear it too much. And so sometimes when I'm speaking to kids, I don't even talk about a book. I'll just talk about, try to motivate them to think about what role they have in making their world a better world to live in. And that's, really meaningful to be able to do that. That's the significance of my kids in my life, among other things, but they really help to focus my work, and all kids do.
Hmm. And I think they also, now this is my experience as a mom, but help to focus the time as well, because all of a sudden there's a different relationship with time when kids are in the picture. So how do you structure your time so that you have the space to do all the things that need to happen with your work? What does your creative process look like now?
Well, I don't have much time. I don't even know what I do. I have a day job. I My writing's a full-time job. Um, More than that probably. And then I have my 5 kids who are all doing stuff. My wife's like crazy busy too, so we don't have a lot of spare time. But I just trying to structure my day the best I can and try to find some kind of a routine because I don't want to get out of the habit of, for example, writing every day. So what I usually do is I try to do one event a day. I could probably do 2 or 3 a day, but I usually book several months ahead because I can only do one thing in a day because I have a day job. And so this is like a lunch for me, you know, I'm like, it's only during the day. And then I usually, if I can get out of bed in the morning, I'll go and do some writing or some editing on my writing desk in the family room. And then I'll, usually drive my daughter to school and then go to work, do an event or two, usually one in a day. And I'll get home and I'll do my dad stuff for a little bit and then, drive around and watch something and then most of my work gets done at night for my project. So I'll usually start writing about 9 or 10 at night.
Yeah.
I'll usually work till about 11 or 12. And then I'll give myself a quota. And that's really important. I don't know if you're asking about scheduling. So like for me, I'll give myself a quota. So things seem manageable.
Mhm.
And I tell kids this too. Maybe it's not 1,000 words a day for you. Maybe it's like 100 words a day. Anything is important. So for me, I try to write at least 1,000 words in a day, especially when I'm working on a middle grade book. Like I'm doing the Mississauga Saga right now, and I write book 4 right now. Those books are about 60 to 70,000 words, it seems like a lot. Even a short story, 10,000 words can seem like a lot. But if you break that down and think, if I read 1,000 words in a day, that's not too much. So if I do that for 70 days, then I can get my draft done. So you schedule it out that way and you just take little baby steps. And I finished last night and I'm up to 28,000 words. And I think I'm still like 30,000 words away or 40,000 words away, but I've done 28,000 words. In about a month and a half, I'll be done. I do have a process for developing a story, but that's just very technical, just getting the idea and extrapolating into some kind of like a beat sheet or a moment sheet with all the important moments of the story, then developing it further into a synopsis, a summary, almost as though I've written it already and I've read it. Then I use that as a blueprint. It also helps to further focus though. So I have my blueprint. I know exactly where I'm going on, each day. So that when I'm writing that day, I just look at my blueprint and I know I have 1,000 words. So I just chip away at it that way and I follow my map. And then I get a pretty focused, at least workable first draft. And then editing is most of the work, but that's anyway.
I think that's great advice, because I think somebody who wants to sit down and write something, I can think of myself having to write an essay, and you sit down and you start with a blank screen, and it can be very overwhelming. So I think I really like how in so many of the things that you do, you seem to take what you describe as the long view. And you talked about that with healing, right? It can be 7 generations, but everything we do counts. And in a way, it's a similar process you're describing with your book. It's just a longer view that allows things to have their own space without it being completely overwhelming. And so I think that can be the case when you go to create anything. You have this idea in mind. As a creator, you can see the end result of what you're aiming for. And then there's all these things that need to happen. And while it sounds simple to lay it out, like it's very practical, easier said than done in a way for many people. So I think it's helpful.
Yeah, I do think that a white page is intimidating, but it's also really exciting. That's like your canvas.
Yeah.
Whatever ants you march across it, it's going to be, but there's any possibility, right? Because it's just like you can paint anything on that canvas, which is, I think, really exciting.
I think that's exciting too. One of the things that's interested me about this relationship between creativity and entrepreneurship is the comfort that I think people have to have with risk. Because I think the creative process sort of trains us to get more comfortable taking risks, because we never know. You can have something in mind that you want to create, but you never know if you're going to land there. And oftentimes you land somewhere different, but maybe better. Yeah. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what that relationship is like with vulnerability, risk, and even mental health, because I think as a creator, sometimes we may be making something that feels deeply personal and deeply meaningful, and then you're sharing it with the world and opening yourself up maybe to criticism or feedback that can be really painful for some creators. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what that journey is like, or if you had advice on that topic.
You're always gonna get bad reviews. I think part of it is over time, you just learn how to get a bit of a thicker skin. Part of being a creator in the world of arts is having a thicker skin, because it helps you in the end too, because you learn how to learn. You learn how to learn from the feedback, no matter how bad it is. Unless someone's trying to hurt you, the stuff that they have to say about your work, you can learn from it. I've learned from negative feedback. I've learned from bad reviews. Sometimes they're valid. Sometimes they don't get it, but sometimes they're valid. One of the things you'll hear from writers is don't go on Goodreads, because you read all your reviews of your books. And I do, though, because I like to hear what people are saying about the books, because readers are smart. So, generally they're really smart. There's patterns that you can find in the things that they say about your work. And those patterns are meaningful, because if everyone's saying one thing about something, there's something to that, right? So you learn from it. And I think the same is true of the editorial process. That's also a part where you need to be able to take feedback and constructive criticism. And one of the things that is tough for newer artists is having your work ripped apart. And so you have to be willing to and actually invite that kind of criticism and that kind of feedback, because nothing you create is going to be perfect, especially not the first time around. And so you have to be, if you really want to create your best stuff, you have to be willing to put in the work to do it. So like for me, writing a book is going to take about 4 months. and I have to be prepared to edit it for about 10 months. So every book's going to take about a year to year and 2 months to write from start to finish. And again, I think it's a long view thing too, but that's openness to feedback and criticism is important. But I also think that as a writer and artist, you also have to be willing to challenge yourself to take risks because you're not going to grow if you don't do that. I could say, I've done 2 picture books and I've won 2 Governor General's awards. I could be very comfortable writing picture books and only write picture books and not do anything else because I've been successful at it. And I think I would write good picture books but I wouldn't be growing at all. I want to be the best writer. I'm not going to be the best writer. There's a lot of better writers than me out there. But if you're not trying to be the best, then why are you doing it? At least try to be your best. But anyway, this is a here and there answer. But so the only way you're going to do that is to stay out of your comfort and to challenge yourself to try new things, to try to make bold decisions, to put yourself out there. And that's how you develop skill. That's how you develop voice. That's how you develop craft. And I found that's been effective for me. I've written poetry and comic books and picture books and all these different kinds of literature. And I said, I think earlier is that's helped me to become a better writer and a more versatile writer. And that's part of it too, is your willingness to go out there and be bold and to make bold choices and to not stick in any sort of comfort zone or play it safe. I think that's how you get your best work out of yourself.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that in terms of being bold with your choices, with yourself. And I wonder how I think for a lot of people, where they might fall into a comfort trap is when you start to attach income to their product. This sense of maybe that brings up a certain level of fear if you're depending on you're releasing a book and it needs to make a certain amount of money for you to pay your bills. I'm thinking that is potentially one area that creators struggle. So I'm wondering, do you find, you've mentioned having a day job, do you find that allows you to have a certain fluidity and gives your work the freedom that it needs? Do you think that those things are related? Or do you think that there's just when you're writing from a place of integrity, when you're creating what you need to create, that you just trust the rest to fall into place? I'm wondering what that looks like.
I think it is a bit of trust. You should never write thinking about income.
Mm-hmm.
No, really. You really shouldn't. Because if you let money drive your creativity, it's not really going to work out. I don't think very well. If you're lucky and you work hard, a bit of it's luck. Sometimes I think you make your own luck. Mainly, I think it's just working very hard and being determined, not giving up. If you do that, money might come. But I don't think thinking about how much money you're going to make or how much money you want to make, or part of it, I think, is it's okay to dream to make a lot of money writing, but I don't think that should ever be the driving force of your creativity. If you're doing it for those reasons, it's probably not something that you're ultimately passionate for,
Mm-hmm.
and you're passionate for money.
Yeah.
That's not gonna help you make your best stuff. Really, when you think about it, I'm a pretty successful writer in Canada. I work full time, so I think being able to have some sort of a fallback that will help you to support yourself enables you, like you said, to not have to worry about that so much with your writing and to just be able to create and to not worry about whether this book is going to flop or not. It hurts when it does, but like it's not going to make or break you either. Hopefully that'll allow you just to learn from it and not to be shattered by it. Because like Blackwater, I think it did really well, but I think I would have liked for it to have done better, but I'm really proud of it. And it doesn't upset me that it didn't ever crack the top 10 in Canada because I didn't have that attachment to I think the tangible, like money part of it. And I get the most emails from Blackwater for people, which is way more meaningful than like a royalty check. You know what I mean? So I think anyways, that's how I think that should work. I don't think you should ever create with money in mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think that should be your master. I think creativity and passion should be.
When I read your work, what comes through for me is a sense of freedom and integrity. And so that answer makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that's the sense of maybe detachment, that not that you're detached, but we need to detach in a way from this outcome, like you said, of what we receive in return. For some people, maybe that's approval or money or whatever other attachment, a certain spot on a chart. But I think when you're creating for the sake of it being a calling and it comes from a place of sort of freedom and integrity, it creates a different result that I think can be felt.
It's yeah, it's definitely a more fulfilling result. Yeah, so that's pretty bang on, I think.
And I wondered also just a little bit about, you have talked about grief in a lot of your work. And I wonder how you navigate the relationship between grief and creativity. Do you find that your grief motivates you to create and is sort of a, I guess I'll just let you talk with it. I'm not going to project onto you what your answer will be, but what do you feel is the relationship between grief and creativity for you?
I think it's like the same with any emotion. If you're going to like part of, I think for my writing at least, is emotional honesty. And I feel like that's how I've been able to connect with a lot of people. Is I've been honest with my own feelings, my own emotions, my past, my life, and as a result, I've been able to connect with people who can relate, who can empathize. And so I think grief is the same thing. And I will say, I don't know where I would have been if it wasn't for creativity and the loss of my father. Losing my dad was nothing I've lost more in my life. He was like my best friend. And I was in an awful place about a year after he died. And if it wasn't for creativity, it wasn't for the stories I was writing about him and talking about him, I was in a bad spot. And so I think that helps you heal in a way. Like storytelling is an act of healing,
Mm.
I think. And whether it's like writing about depression or anxiety or sadness or loss, or it's healing to bleed out onto the page. I feel anyway, because it, I tend to push things down, and if you do that, eventually there's not enough space. It's going to explode. So working through it and writing is the way that I do it, is a way to release that pressure, that whatever you're bottling up, and to just give yourself that kind of that relief. An offshoot of that, a really positive offshoot of that, is that I think that if you do that, then people can recognize that grief in you because maybe they have that grief in themselves. And then that's even more healing. Like having emails from people who've read Blackwater, for example, and who've lost their own mom or their own dad, and being able to talk to them about that with a total stranger.
Mm.
That's like, this really powerful. And it's happened. And it's happened more than once. So I just think it's emotional honesty. I think if you hold that back from yourself, I think that really has a negative impact on the stories you're able to write. I think anyway. If you hold back from yourself, I think you're holding back on your story. And at least in my view,
Mhm.
but it's
Yeah.
hard. It doesn't make it easy. It's hard. But telling people that I went on antidepressants last year, that's hard to tell people that. But ultimately, I think it's important. At least, like, I think for anybody, but for me, like when I say something like that, lots more people hear it than maybe someone who doesn't have as much of a platform. I don't have a big platform, but whatever I have. I think over the long term, it makes it less hard in a way
Mhm.
too.
Yeah. I think you've touched a lot on connection through the interview. In our discussion, I think you've talked a lot about how writing is a tool for connection in many ways. And I hear you saying it again about grief and mental health, that in sharing some of your truths, that it allows others to also connect with that in themselves and to accept whatever the struggle is that they might have with more compassion.
Yeah, you're right. I think to me that storytelling, writing, the main thing it is connections, connecting to things within yourself. It's connecting with other people, with readers, and I think welcoming those connections. Like anybody can email me, I'll always respond eventually when I'm able to. And but I think it also brings people together too. Like it's not just between you and the reader. It's like readers. It brings people together too. But I think that's true of art, like music, painting, dance, writing. It has this transformative power and this power to just bring people together. If you think about it, like, I'm not gonna get too philosophical, but like, one of the people I've listened to a lot lately is like Billie Eilish. I don't know. I listen to certain music when I write. You think about it, like I was watching a video with my son because my son's now into her, and this is at the time she's maybe 18 years old, and that video, Bad Guy, has like over 1 billion views. So you think about that, you brought 1 billion people together. You
Mhm.
know, that's pretty impressive. But that is made possible through art. I think that's pretty neat.
I think that's pretty neat too. Yeah, and I always am amazed when we hear about a war, or I was thinking about Afghanistan, for example, in the summer. One of the areas they target first when they're trying to repress a culture is artists and creators.
Mm.
And I think that's because artists and creators often are truth tellers, but they also have this ability to influence others through their creative expression. And that can be very powerful. So whenever there's repression, I think artists and creators are some of the people who are shut down first and with the most force. I just think that it is so powerful, more powerful than we often realize. And that for those of us who are creators who feel that, what am I like, I think there are many people who undervalue how powerful their creativity is. So my hope with this summit is that people do embrace that ability that they have to communicate and connect with their,
Mm.
with their craft or their calling.
They really are agents of change.
Yeah.
You know, like L'Oreal said, if people will sleep for 100 years, when they wake up, it'll be the artists. I
Mhm.
think that I'm paraphrasing it, but he said it better. But the sentiment is the same. It's very strategic. When you talk about them suppressing art, it's very strategic because people recognize the power of art. I really have a lot of faith in the power of story. And I think that's where I feel like real change is going to come from. It's what motivates me to keep doing it, even though I'm tired,
Mhm.
because I want to take a break. I've been going hard for 13, 12 years now, but I think the ability to plant seeds of change within people through story, I think is what really keeps me going, especially with kids.
Mhm. Thank you, David. I have so enjoyed our conversation, and I have so much respect for you and the work that you share with the world. And I'm really grateful that I got the chance to speak with you today.
Oh, thank you. You're very kind. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To learn more about David's work or to purchase his books, you can visit his website. When I asked David if he had a link that he'd like to share with the audience, rather than sharing something about his own work, he decided that he'd like to take this opportunity to create awareness for the Residential School Survivors Society. To make a donation or learn more, you can visit irsss.ca. Thanks so much for listening.